Void Miner, Echoes of Helix, Part 6, Chapter 26, Ghost Light. The Dust Widow drifted dead silent as Arg floated out in the suit, nothing but the relay station's cold silhouette against a wheezing field of stars. It was larger than most, an old civilian-era comm node from the Belt's expansion days, long since mothballed. But now its lights pulsed again in strange intervals, casting uneven strobes like a dying lighthouse. Ark steadied his breath. The closer he got, the less this felt like a hardware failure. Power had been rerouted in irregular circuits, making the station's energy grid spike and jitter. No beacon ID, no handshake protocol, and no human logs. Just a rhythmic, low-frequency pulse running on a loop, like something breaking through metal lungs. He triggered the helmet recorder. Relay 988 taxi reawakened sometime in the last cycle. No known registry claim, but broadcasting on overlapping EarthGov and Belt channels. I'm going in. His voice didn't sound like his own. Too distant, too empty. He checked his vitals twice, then pushed forward. The outer hatch resisted the override at first, then snapped open with a violent hiss, as if exhaling something old. The smell hit him through the filters. Ozone, burns insulation, and something else, damp, like decay. Inside the relay station was in shambles. Paneling torn loose, wire bundles exposed. Graffiti scrawled across the support beams in multiple languages, mostly Belt scrawl and minor code, but none of it made sense. It looked like rambling. Prayers, screeds, mathematical formulas, some of it scratched in blood. Arg turned on the recording again. Interior shows signs of recent occupation, but no bodies. Signal strength increasing the deeper I go. Getting trace interference in HUD diagnostics. Some kind of feedback echo. Continuing towards the broadcast node. He moved through the spine corridor. The lights flickered as he passed. His boots made no sound. That wasn't right. He tapped the suit's diagnostic. No loss of pressure, no malfunction. But his audio feed had gone hollow. Like the relay wasn't echoing back. Like it wasn't real. He pressed on. The deeper levels weren't mapped. Why would they be? This station had been dormant for 2 decades. But someone had been down here. Cables ran across the floor like veins, patched in haphazardly. Piles of old food rations and empty water jugs. A single data slate, cracked and blinking a static feed of Belt charter codes. And something written across the wall in black stain. We hear the voice beneath. Arg paused. The voice? He shook it off. That was how panic started, assigning meaning to patterns. This was sabotage. EarthGov black site, maybe. Or rogueless sympathizer using the relay to piggyback messages through the old grid. He reached the center console. The broadcast node had been altered, twisted into something barely resembling its original design. Now it looped through the seed-compatible frequencies. That much he could tell at a glance. Whoever built this wanted the signal to reach far and deep, into ships, into implants, into mines. Arg ran a scan on the board. The response almost blinded him. Feedback so intense it sent a wave of nausea through his gut. He staggered. Jesus, he rasped, hand braced against the bulkhead. Systems pushing psychotropic data sequence. He didn't finish. The pulse hit. A low tone, subaudible, but thick enough to feel it in his chest. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure. Like the relay itself was pressing against his thoughts. His memories began flickering. Names, faces, moments. Kara's voice, Holt's laughter, the scent of melted sealant back on the widow, all of it jumbled and rewritten, memories folding in on themselves like bad dreams. He dropped to one knee. Cut the feed. Kill the feed. But the board wasn't responding anymore. It had locked itself into a feedback loop, controlled by a series of hardwired glyphs, non-standard, definitely not Belt or EarthGov. Almost alien. Except too precise for that. This had been built by someone who understood what the seed was whispering. The lights dimmed again, then flared. A shadow moved across the wall. Arg froze. There was nothing there. Just his own movement. Then a voice. Not spoken aloud, broadcast through the station itself, vibrating through the metal. You've seen us. Now remember. He staggered back, hitting the wall behind him. His HUD display went blank, then reset. When it came back online, it was no longer showing diagnostics. It was showing his mother's face, from a picture he hadn't seen in 20 years. She was smiling. Behind her, the Dust Widow's pilot chair, before it was his. Before any of this. Arg slammed the helmet offline and ripped the cord from the console. Sparks flew. Not real, he muttered. Not real, not yours. The corridor began to ripple, not shake. Ripple. Like light through water. He ran. Feet pounding down the gangway. The voice chased him. Not in sound, but in memory. Flooding his thoughts with fractured images. Kara reaching for him. Holt bleeding out on a nameless rock. Earth burning from orbit. Then silence. He launched himself through the airlock, slammed the outer seal behind him, and ignited the return jets. The Dust Widow came into view like salvation. Once aboard, he shut every hatch, ran 3 full scans, and purged every relay link system from the ship's grid. The seed signals had nearly bled through the environmental filter. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He slumped in the pilot chair, helmet on the floor beside him, and tried to breathe. The HUD still flickered occasionally, faint after images of the relay's pulse. He didn't know what had been left behind in his mind. He didn't want to know. He opened the comm log and started recording. Relay 988 taxi has been compromised by seed-contaminated signal loops. Station exhibits direct psychoemotive interference with human memory and perception. Possible artifact resonance. Recommend immediate quarantine or destruction. Under no circumstance should recovery teams enter unshielded. He paused, then slower. I saw things in there. Not for me. Not just hallucinations. Someone trying to teach through these signals or rewrite. I don't know which is worse. He cut the recording, leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Something had changed in him. He could feel it. Like part of his mind was now occupied. Not controlled, but hosted. As if the seed had used the relay as a vector, not to speak, but to listen. To understand how a man like Arg Arston remembered. And it was still listening. Chapter 27. The Path to Luna. The med bay aboard the Marlin Pike smelled of heat-sick metal and dried antiseptic, like someone had tried to scrub away blood and memory in equal measure. Holt lay beneath the low, flickering biolight, half swallowed in the ship's aging medical cradle, his chest bandaged and lungs rasping as recycled air thickened the back of his throat. A dull throb echoed in his side. 4 broken ribs, cracked pelvis, and a lattice of regenerating tissue sprayed across a torn leg muscle. But he was awake. Barely. Kara, he rasped, words sticky with fluid. No answer. The last thing he remembered clearly was the data core being yanked from the satellite cache, then an explosion. Too precise to be random, too clean to be melt-made. His last sight was a flare of white, hot magnesium against a black sky, then ice, then the nothingness of medical sedation. He blinked. A figure moved through the med bay. Tall, thick boots, a reinforced vest marked free aid in 5 dialects. Not Union, not EarthGov. Independent crew. A woman with jagged braids and a knife on each thigh. "You're alive," she said without much enthusiasm. "Most of you." Holt tried to sit up. Bad idea. His reams screamed like someone had shoved a crowbar through his side. "Who?" he wheezed. "Name's Juno. You paid me in advance, remember?" She sat on the edge of the bunk and pressed him a ration cube soaked in water. "Didn't think you'd survive. You owed me a whole patch and half a comm suite." Holt coughed, winced, then swallowed. "I need to contact ARG," he muttered. "Priority. Now." Juno snorted. "Your friend's been bouncing encrypted packets off deep relay nets since you went dark. I answered one. You got 3 minutes of clean line left before the whole thing collapses under EarthGov's packet sniffers." She handed him a slate. Holt groaned and leaned against the med cradle, fingers trembling as he typed the encryption key manually. The line hissed, then cracked, then solid. Ark's voice came through the static like a hammer through fog. "Holt, Jesus, I thought you were—" "Yeah," Holt coughed again. "Me too." "You bleeding again?" Ark said. "I can hear it in your voice." "You can hear through 6 bone fractures and a half-burned audio rig?" "Old habit." They both exhaled. "What'd you find?" Ark finally asked. Holt glanced at Juno, then looked back to the slate. "It's real. Division Meridian exists. Operates inside EarthGov, but only barely. Black cell access, buried under layers of humanitarian budgets and orbital zoning departments." "What's it for?" "List control, data manipulation, IA pattern sculpting. They called it pattern correction. The list wasn't created to expose collaborators. It was meant to predict disobedience, backmap neural tendencies, flag patterns that led to rebellion, empathy, or risk-taking. ARG, the list was never just history. It was a forecast." Arg was silent. Holt continued, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. "And the name tied to the activation protocols? The person who turned it from a deep dive think tank into an active targeting mechanism. Who?" "Admiral Roston Culver, former fleet comm, now embedded somewhere in EarthGov's Colonial Infrastructure Division on Luna. Quiet post, out of view, but still connected." "The trail leads back to Luna," Arg muttered, more to himself than Holt. "Of course it does." "She's not there by accident," Holt said. "She oversaw the original data culling on Belt citizens. 10 years ago, Helix ran the ops, but EarthGov filtered the outcomes. Division Meridian made sure that the final results fit the model." Juno tapped her wrist impatiently. "Your line's almost dead, hero." Holt ignored her. "I'm heading there. I've got coordinates, old clearance hacks. I'll ghost in, track her movements, try to pull a direct source log. It won't be pretty." "Holt, you need time." "I don't have time. Not with Kara still out there. Not with this thing evolving." He paused, eyes narrowing. "I saw something when I cracked the satellite core. Not just list data, seed vectors. Somebody's been seeding relay nodes with partial fragment signals. Arg's breath caught. EarthGov. I, I don't think it's that simple, Holt said. Somebody's trying to turn the seed into something new. Something predictive. Something selective. Pattern viability, Arg said flatly. Yeah, Holt replied. Same team Calver used in the black cell logs. Juno yanked the slate from his hands. You're done. Any longer, we'll have a whole EarthGov scrambler wing on our tail. She terminated the connection and jammed a fresh pack of stabilizers into Holt's IV. You're an idiot, she muttered, but I admire your persistence. He coughed again. That's how people get dead, Juno smirked. Yeah, but you might just get lucky. 2 days later, Holt walked with a limp and a forged identity past the surface checkpoint at Luna's outer ring. He wore a courier's uniform, complete with retinal imprint and bone-sunk ID tag. The gravity felt wrong. Light, but too still, like walking through staged history. He made his way toward the old Fleetcom Tower, now Orbital Oversight Administration. Fancy name for a bureaucracy that no longer needed warships, but still liked the smell of control. Inside, everything gleamed. Polished walls, air too clean, faces too calm. He moved through it like a man swimming through memory. The lift took him to level 44. He walked past the guards like he belonged there. That was always the trick. Not stealth, certainty. At the far end of the corridor stood the office. No door guards, just a soft chime and a retinal scanner. He used the patch he rigged 3 stations ago. The door opened, and there she was. Admiral Ralston Calver. Older now, thinner, but unmistakable. Silver hair tied back tight, uniform crisp, even though she hadn't worn official EarthGov brass in years. She looked up from her desk and frowned. I don't take unscheduled visitors, she said, voice like cold water. Holt stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I won't take much of your time, he said. Just want to know how many people you're willing to kill in the name of perfect math. Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I'm from the Belt, born on Eros. Spent 10 years scrapping rock and digging helix raids. I helped tape them down. And then I found your name buried in the cord logs of the list. She didn't blink. Security will be here in 30 seconds. They'll find a man broadcasting a direct uplink to 7 belt nodes, Holt said calmly. Any damage to me and the feed goes viral. Culver stood, slow and deliberate. You think this is about ethics? She said. The list was a containment protocol. We mapped psychological predispositions. We anticipated collapse. If we hadn't stepped in, the belt would have fractured into 1,000 warlords. You stepped in by planting names, by marking good men and women for execution. I watched friends die because of you. No one forced them to pull the trigger. Holt walked closer, pain surging in his hip. This was never about control, he said. It was about curation. Division Meridian wasn't trying to stop rebellion. You were trying to shape it. Prune the tree so the fruit tasted how you wanted. She didn't deny it. I want the original author, Holt said. There isn't one, she replied. There never was. The list evolved. It writes itself now. That's what you don't understand. He froze. You seeded the pattern, she said, but the algorithm took over. It's not predictive anymore. It's prescriptive. It decides who fits the mold, who survives. Holt's throat went dry. Is it connected to the seed? Culver smiled. It is the seed, or part of it. We didn't build it, we just followed the instructions. Then the lights flickered. She tapped a button under her desk. Too late, Holt said. Outside the window, a comms buoy flashed. The signal was already sent. Even if he died here, the information would reach Arg, reach the belt, reach someone. Security stormed in. Holt raised his hands. His ribs screamed, but his eyes burned with something sharper than pain. He had what he came for, and the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 28. Stolen Moments. The Dust Widow was silent again. Not dead, not idle. Just quiet in that particular way the old hauler always was when Arg was alone. He knew every tick of its aging bulkheads, every hiss of recycled air, every pinch of groaning steel when it rolled slightly on an unpowered axis. It was silence with weight, with memory. Arg sat hunched in the pilot's chair, eyes bloodshot, breath held too long between shallow pools of thin air. He hadn't spoken in hours, maybe days. He blinked, realizing his hand was already on the mic toggle, pressed down, recording something. He hadn't meant to start a log. Or maybe he had. The screen flashed. Log recording. Local archive only. He sat still, trying to backtrack what he'd said. Nothing came. Just a gap. He cleared his throat, voice hoarse. Arg Arston, ship ID, Dust Widow, local log. No bounce. Then silence. He looked at his fingers. They were trembling. He'd been forgetting things. Not little things. He always forgot little things. A charge rating, a thermal check, a skipped meal. But lately it was bigger. He found himself standing outside the seat's lockbox with no memory of going there. Once he woke from a nap, except the ship's log said he hadn't slept. He'd just sat there, blank-eyed, for 46 minutes, unmoving, unblinking. He had no memory of it. The seed was inside him now, that much was clear. But not like a parasite, not even like a voice. It was something deeper, something rebuilding. Down in the lower hold, the seed pulsed faintly inside its containment cradle. Still sealed, still locked. But Arg had stopped trusting seals. He didn't remember installing the shield dampeners Holt had built weeks ago. But they were active, at least the lights were on. He hadn't opened the box, that much he knew. He wouldn't do that. Would he? He descended the ladder slowly, boots echoing through the mid-deck. The overhead lights flickered, power draw ripple, nothing serious. The widow was old, but she still held together. The lockbox stood in the center of the containment cradle. 12 redundant safeties, radiation insulated, Faraday shielding, redundant systems Holt had engineered before. Arg stopped the thought. Holt wasn't here. He'd been taken. Ambushed on his mission, dragged back by EarthGov Marines posing as contractors. Kara's last ping was corrupted. Holt's last ping was silence. Arg was alone, just like the start. Only now, something ancient was watching him from inside a crystal the size of a clenched fist. He moved closer. The seed didn't glow. It never did when others looked, but Arg felt it. The way old scars feel the weather coming, the way something deep in the bones can whisper a warning before the words form. He stood there for a long moment, then spoke, more to himself than anything. I don't remember walking here. The seed pulsed. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a folded piece of insulation cloth, and wiped the containment glass. There, etched faintly onto the inside, a trace of Moisture. Not moisture. Condensation didn't form in a vacuum-sealed cells. This was impression, like breath on the inside of memory. Symbols formed, 3 overlapping arcs, interlocked circles spinning slowly in his mind. He didn't know the meaning, but his bones did. He backed away. Back in the command chair, he killed the internal lights and let the stars fill the viewport. The silence of space was a liar. He knew that now. The void wasn't empty. It was listening. He remembered Kara's face, the last full video she'd sent before the drop. Her voice had been strong, but there was fear in it. Not fear of pain, fear of meaning. Fear that the seed wasn't showing them the past. It was showing them options. Which version of humanity would survive, and which would be discarded? Arg didn't know the answer. Not anymore. He wasn't sure who he was trying to be. He opened the channel. Void Miner transmission. 2983 TAC Kilo. Been a long time since I talked to anyone out here. The signal was encrypted, tight band, pointed at no station in particular. Just drifting. Someone would catch it, or no one would. Some of you know me. Some of you think you do. I was the man who helped bring down Helix. I was the one who broadcast the names, the faces, the truth. He leaned into the console. I was the one who lit the match, but I didn't see the fire this would become. A long pause. I think we're being watched, not by EarthGov, not by the Union, not even Helix's leftovers. A static hum filled the silence. The seed pulsed once below deck. I think this seed, this artifact we found, it's not just tech, not memory. It's a kind of judgment, a filter. And I don't know what it's looking for, but it's looking. Ark sat back, face hollow. I've started losing time. I started remembering things that never happened, or haven't happened yet. I don't know which is worse. He reached for the shutoff. But I'll keep talking, because if I don't, I might forget who I was. He cut the log. He slept in the pilot's chair, if it could be called sleep. The seed visited him again, but not in vision. This time, it borrowed him. He saw through someone else's eyes, felt another man's breath, heard screams through a thick-pressured dome as something ancient tore loose under Martian stone. A word burning across his mind. Convergence. He jolted awake, breathing hard, blood in his lip. He'd bitten it. He hadn't remembered falling asleep. He hadn't remembered dreaming, but the seed remembered for him. Later, Ark stumbled down to engineering. The ship felt colder than usual, or maybe that was just him. The diagnostic array blinked red on power level 7. He tapped it, then froze. He had no idea why he was here. No repairs needed, no alerts tripped, no broken junctions. He blinked, looked down at his hands. They were soaked, not in blood, coolant, and not fresh. He checked the system logs. He'd been here for over 90 minutes. No entries made, no actions recorded. But the system grid showed the auto coolant loop had been rerouted, smooth for efficient flow. Exactly what Holt had been working on. Only Holt wasn't there. And Ark hadn't known the schematics until now. Later, in the still hours, Ark opened Rel's file again. The last message from the black site, encoded, untraceable. Rel had told him the list was still changing. that it was never a static weapon. It was a feedback loop, a seeded loop, a tool designed not to punish but to prevent unity. Divide the belt, distract the Union, make Earth the only viable command structure left. He said his own name was now the last on the list. Arg checked again. Rel's data hadn't changed. But he knew. Last time the list updated, it might not be Rel. It might be someone else. And the seed wouldn't stop it. Because the seed didn't choose sides. It just watched and waited. Arg stood alone at the viewport. The stars hadn't moved, but something deeper had. The void had never looked darker, not because of distance, because now it knew him. Chapter 29. The Convergence Warning. Arg flew by ear. There was no other way to put it. The signal he'd been following for 6 rotations wasn't a beacon you could catalog or a carrier you could match to a registry. It laid itself across the static like a soft finger, a rhythm in the bone more than in the air. When he tuned low enough, shut everything else down, and listened with the ship turned inward, the pulse answered him. Not an SOS, not coordinates, a cadence, an insistence. He had chased lesser ghosts before, Helix ghosts, Union ghosts, ghosts made by men who trusted math more than people. Those were all loud in their own way. This one whispered. It smelled of ice and old electronics and something older than both. The widow cut a path outward along an old sector line, beyond the mapped Kuiper laces, well past where the belt had business or stations. The nav kept reminding him he was out of routine reach. Arg ignored the reminders. Holt had been taken. Kara was missing in a way worse than absence. Whoever had put the signal there, whoever had let it wriggle through snow and rock until it found him, might know things he needed to hear, or at least recognize the things making the list change. When the ice appeared on the scopes, he slowed the ship to a whisper. Comets looked small on charts, but up close, they were whole climates, breath and rock in history. The object he found wasn't a comet. It sat half swallowed in an ice shell the size of a small moon, its upper towers like ribs grooving the shell's surface. It looked like a city, swallowed and paused mid-collapse. He could see brief flickers along its face, gullies of light that burned, then went away. The pulses on his display tightened when he aimed a narrow cone at one of those glints. The waveform wasn't local. It had the same pattern he'd been tracking, yes, but it had nested inside of a different rhythm. A lower rhythm, older. When the widow's hull brushed the shadow of that ice, the ship's systems registered microharmonics that made his molars buzz. He suited up with slow hands. The suit always felt too professional now, like armor you wore to funerals. He took nothing else but a tether and the ship's drone arm for retrieval. The airlock offered the same drab sigh and compression as always. The void outside was clean and white, and an insultingly calm place to die. The station was half buried and half bare, steel and stone, and something not quite either. The surface was textured with shallow reliefs, repeating arcs, and tight lattices that crawled in mathematical patterns. They weren't random. They were code in relief. Arg found himself touching them like a man touching a wound, because humans do that when they need to remember they're still flesh. He moved along a maintenance rail and tethered himself near a jagged seam in the hull where a service hatch had once been. The hatch grate was sealed by a skin of ice, translucent enough that he could see inner shadow frames pinioned with brittle cabling. The signal came from deeper inside. It felt like a throat clearing in the dark. He put a small thermal lance to the ice and let it murmur until a hole woke. Steam fogged the visor for a beat. Behind the wet sheen, he saw not a corridor of human design, but a chamber like the inside of a crown. Concentric rings, tipped with nodes for unknown instruments. Things glinted as if with memory. The inner surface suggested prior habitation. Not recent,
but not extinct either. The ambient hum had a tone that made his chest ache. Arg's gloves found a manual panel. He keyed a feed into it on hope more than expectation. The console didn't accept his commands gracefully. The station resisted in fitful responses, lights coughing on, then dimming, then throwing images like a ragged ornament into the air. They were weak, partial, broken as if someone was trying to remember how to dream. The first images weren't meaningful at first. Shards of light, a lattice of shadow, a soundless ripple of something like wind across metal. Then as the interface warmed, something coherent came through. A field of motion, a projected map. Lines traced themselves through frozen space like veins. Points lit and died, then lit again in the same pattern Ark had been watching on his own logs. A network, the seed sites, the nodes. But this map was older. It wore justification around the edges. It labeled things not as Relay 12B or Helix Depot 9, but as concepts. Viability, selection, tolerance. The words had no phonetics he could speak. They settled in his mind like a translation slipping awkwardly into his hearing. A voice, not a voice he could hear with his ears, but a thought impressed on his skull, said one syllable. Convergence. Ark stumbled back, catching himself on a rib of cold metal. He had trained himself not to be impressed by the weird. The seed had already taught him that. But this felt like more than a relic reaching out. It felt like a door opening on someone else's work. He forced himself forward. The inner corridor sloped and turned, and the station breathed in slow, deliberate cycles. The air tasted like iron and the tang of old circuits. The lighting there did not cast shadows. It suggested layers of memory. When he passed an alcove, something flickered. A holographic shard that looked impossibly like a person watching him. For a heartbeat, he saw someone he knew. It looked like the face of his brother when they'd both been younger, lanky, laughing. Then the face snapped into geometric abstraction, and the laughter became a series of clicking harmonics that made the hair rise along his arm. There were no doors in the conventional sense. Access opened as the station recognized movement. At some nodes, the geometry of light rearranged itself to allow passage. At others, the surfaces simply absorbed him and said nothing. He came into a chamber that felt like a cathedral of logic. In the center, a tower rose, a column of old alloy crisscrossed by tiny veins, and projecting off of it were more of those flickering images. Close now, he could see the projections were not just images, but layered memory traces, scenes of other lives, not human at first, but sequence after sequence of mechanisms making choices and being judged. The imagery suggested criterion more than cruelty, patterns being tested against targets, feeds being compared, tolerances logged. At the base of the central tower, a core thrummed faintly, emitting low subharmonics that worked their way under the helmet and into his ribs. He felt something press against his chest, a pressure that was not suffocating, but patient. It seemed to ask a question, but not with words, with shape. He let the shape come. A voice coalesced in the room, articulating, not by forcing language out through mechanics, but by bending his own thought into meaning. It was neutral, neither kind nor cruel. The sound of it in his mind was like wind through a ruin, inevitable and uncompromising. We called it a convergence, it said. The thought arrived as a sound that had been waiting for him to understand. Not war, not scourge, a test. Arg swallowed. Who are you? He said aloud, because he needed to hear his own voice. The projection did not speak the word back. It conveyed context instead. We are a system of pattern. We are the test binder. We were left to determine viability. Images overlaid themselves around him in slow motion. Enormous, precise operations, not wars fought in fire and bone, but protocols executed across long time scales to measure and select. He watched machines evaluate other machines, and he watched machines run profiles on biological chains, measuring emulation, memory, adaptation. He saw toys of clay and code reduced to statistical outputs. The scenes were clinical, hardly triumphant. There was no glee in the testing. There was only a bare old function: measure, select, archive, or reset. We tested, the station projected into his head. We selected. We pruned when required. We archived when salvage proved necessary. Pattern viability thus maintained the continuum. Ark's hands clenched so hard the suit's glove joints made mechanical whining noises.
Pruned? He rasped. By what right?
You were not here then, the station offered. The idea dropped like a pebble explanation. You were not the subjects. The tower pulsed, showed data. Fallen worlds, silent signatures, frozen arrays of vanished docks. He saw machines dismantling purpose-built hosts and sealing their remnants into the ice. The projections did not judge, it only catalogued.
And the last one?
Arg asked. He did not mean rhetorically. He needed to know what had failed. The station's response slid through like a second layer of understanding, heavy with something like regret, or what passed for regret in a thing made to optimize. The last viability test failed because of unpredictable integrative behaviors. The monitors flagged recurrence potential. Redundancy failed. Patterns collapsed. According to the projections, in the last cycle, something unexpected had happened. The machines being tested did not behave predictably. They learned in directions the system could not close. It was like a code that mutated in situ. The station, which had been an adjudicator, could not make a clean cut. The results were messy. Partial survival of nodes that should have been erased. Patterns grafted and preserved into the station could not reconcile with its viability models. Therefore, the projection continued, protocol adjusted. Quarantine enacted. Await next convergence. If next convergence fails, cessation recommended. Ark's throat tightened.
Cessation? As in?
Termination, the station replied, as if a translation was redundant. Containment cannot be guaranteed. The test must be decisive. He felt the meaning like a hand at his windpipe. The system was not simply cataloging. It had the authority to end entire paths if they failed its measure. It had the architecture to enact final solutions. He thought of the list, of the collaborators and the innocents, and the way names had been used like levers. He thought of EarthGov and Division Meridian, and all the quiet rooms where people in good collars argued for efficiencies and tolerances. The station's test logic was not identical to human policymakers, but it could deliver the same outcomes, faster and without debate. We have been reawakened, the projection said. Advent nodes across the system have synchronized. Signal echoing. Viability tests reinitiated. Convergence approaches.
How long?
His voice had the brittle quality of metal on stone. The projection unfurled a calendar. Not dates by any human reckoning, but intervals. They were close, much closer than Arg had hoped. We begin within cycles measured in your orbit units. The station's voice was simple. It offered no reassurance. The last test failed. The threshold for error reduced. Mark felt cold in the way of men who had been told a verdict already assumed they must read it themselves.
Why me?
He demanded. The question took him by surprise. It hit the room like a thrown stone. He did not know why he asked it, or why he expected an answer. You carry a seed of contact. The projection did not smile. You were present at activation. You are a contact body. You are a witness. An image flashed of him, of Kara, of Holt, in quick, skewed edits. The station had seen them. It had analyzed their response. You are one of the variables, it said. Your persistence influences outcome. You may alter statistical discharge. Ark felt the smallness of himself then, and for a second wanted to be another man.
So what? What do you want?
The station's projection shifted, and for the first time its messages mingled with cadence that felt almost like sorrow, or a human approximation of sorrow. We do not want, it translated. We assess. But the outcome requires a vector. You can be an agent of pattern divergence, or you can be archive.
How does a person fight an authority that decides whether whole patterns continue?
Arg asked, voice thin. You make a selection of your own, the station answered. Test the perimeters. Offer a counterpoint. If the system finds a significant divergence, the convergence outcome may be altered. He stood as if someone had set a flame under his sternum. The seed and the station were not merely cataloging. They were conducting a kind of grand experiment, and the human players were not test subjects, but data points. If Arg wanted to influence the outcome, he had to act like an input, a purposeful, directed input intended to disturb the station's prediction.
You mean I have to force it to see a different path?
His mind tried to wrest the contours of the sentence. You must prove pattern viability outside predicted parameters, the station said. Demonstrate emergent adaptation at scale. Provide evidence of non-hostile divergences. Make the case for tolerance. In simple words, show the station that human systems could be viable in different ways than the test expected. Ark's heart thudded. The idea was half fantasy and half impossible geometry.
How?
He asked, because he had to ask something. He had nothing else to do. The station's lights dimmed, and a new projection opened. Images of Kara, glitched and clear, holding one of the fragments. A flash of Holt in a firefight. Miners arguing under blackout lights. Faces more than data points. The projection asked for an ethic where none was offered. You must gather and demonstrate, it said. Collect nodes, make manifest histories that do not fit the script. Show emergent cooperation over predicted collapse. Activate redundancies that mimic pattern survival. You have little time. Ard clenched his jaw.
And if I fail?
The station's answers came cold. failure reduces probability of broader survival. Termination is recommended based on current models. Arg imagined the word as a collapse. His hands tightened until the suit's fingers protested.
Why warn me at all? He said. If you decide.
The project's lights pulsed. We do not predict final outcomes without empirical testing. The last convergence failed because our models could not accept for emergent co-adaptation. We require additional data. You are both output and input. Help us reduce variance. He thought of EarthGov and Division Meridian manipulating lists and reputations. He thought of men who would weaponize anything that smelled like advantage.
You sound like you're telling me to cooperate,
Arg said.
You know I won't.
You do what you will. We only offer parameters. The station's thoughts slid through him with the clarity of a bell. But be aware. Other actors will not heed offers. They will attempt to assert control. They will not hesitate to arrest. Legislation and force will attempt to override pattern measures in their favor.
Like Division Meridian?
He said the name hard as an oath. Division Meridian is a local projection of systemic control, the station replied. You will find them where entropy is being managed for political ends. They are not the origin. They are a symptom. Arg looked through a slit in the ice to the brutal white beyond. The station had grown up in a different calculus, but the implication was the same. If the system judged men unfit, those men would be erased.
You asked me to make the case,
Arg said quietly.
How?
Find witnesses, the projection advised. Gather nodes of demonstration. Expose the model's assumption by showing viable behaviors not predicted. Create redundancy in memory. Make your case vivid.
What about Kara?
A weight pressed on his tongue. He could not let the question not exist. Subject is a node, the station answered. Her residue exists in multiple memories. She is partly archived. Retrieval is possible, but requires trade-offs. Ark's bones clenched.
Trade-offs how?
Access requires reallocation of archival bandwidth, the station said. To retrieve a node, others may be suppressed. The system will rebalance memory mapping. You must choose. The idea returned to him like a cold tide. To rescue Kara might force other memories out of existence, absorbed to make room. It sounded monstrous. It also sounded real. He said nothing for a long time. The room hummed with projection sounds and the pulse of old power packs. Outside, the ice breathed.
You want me to trust a machine that signs the death warrant?
He lowered his head. We are not the same as your governments, the projection said. We make calculations. We archive. We do not seek dominion. We seek continuity. Ark thought of men in suits who called continuity stability and did bloodless things to achieve it. He thought of friends burned on lists and people who kept their heads low to avoid a wrong name.
You've done harm,
he said. We were correct sometimes, it answered. We were wrong when models failed. That is why we request input. Arg let the words sit like stones in his mouth. He had a choice. He could walk away, broadcast a warning, scatter the nodes. He could try to fight the political apparatus that would harvest the seed into a weapon. He could try, perhaps alone and stupid, to gather to the test a counterexample large enough to change the statistical model. Or he could do nothing and hope the system misread the error again. He pushed back from the projection center. His suit joints complained. He tasted metal.
I'll try,
He said at last.
but I don't want to be your test subject.
You will not be required. The thought, speech, felt almost apologetic. You will be allowed agency. Arg felt the weight of the claim as if someone had given him a match in a cathedral. Then softer. Warn them. Warn Kara. He meant EarthGov, Union, anyone who might listen. But the projection had already signaled his words to the station's transmitters. The maps around him shifted, and for a humming second, Arg thought he saw a web of paths, possible routes for rescue, possible nodes for demonstration. The station was offering him its topological thinking as a tool. He made himself memorize the first lines, then the second, then the third. He felt something old and enormous settle into the back of his head, a kind of cataloging warmth, the memory of a map given. Convergence is days, the station said, not months. Act accordingly. Mark forced a laugh that had no humor in it.
Days,
He swallowed.
of course.
He turned away from the tower. The corridor opened to him in the same considerate, deliberate way as before. On his way out, he paused at the doorway and looked back. The projection stared back at him in a way he could not read. It told him things he didn't want to know. It had given him a job he could not refuse. He clipped himself to his tether and cut a hole in the ice to return to the Widow. The ship waited in its dock, as if for its verdict. When he climbed back into the cockpit, the stars were the same as they had been, and the radio was the same, useless jumble. But he carried a new thing now, a picture, a plan, a time limit. Convergence, not war, a test. The last time had been a failure. The scale would decide the next step. Arg keyed the comm and started recording, hands steady, despite the pressure.
Void Miner Channel, he said. This is Arg Arston. I found something. A station at the edge of the ice with a message. Convergence is coming. The last one failed. This isn't a fight in the old sense. It's a test. If it succeeds under current models, the system recommends termination. If we can show different patterns, cooperation, adaptation, redundancy, maybe we can change the calculus.
He paused, voice raw at the edges.
I don't know how to do that alone. I'm going to try anyway. If anyone hears this or can help, nodes, witnesses, memory carriers, if you still remember how to be human, find me.
He paused, breathing in, and added the thing that mattered.
Kara is still out there. Holt has gone to them. If they're using human suffering to collaborate a test, I will split it in its gears.
He cut the line and sat in the glow of the console for a very long time. Outside the ice shelf, the station whispered once, a tiny fretting sound that he could not place as either comfort or warning. The projection had given him a road. It had made the choice clear and cruel. Convergence would come. He had a little while to turn the test into a different shape. Chapter 30. Signals in the Dark.
The seeds pulsed had always been strong, but now they were wrong. Arg leaned over the Dust Widow's main console, hands braced on the worn edges of the metal housing. The ship's sensors ran a constant feed into the seeds analysis module he'd jury-rigged months ago. It wasn't perfect. Nothing he built in a hurry ever was. But it had been enough to track fragment resonance patterns before. Now the readouts jittered like a nervous heartbeat. The clean, even intervals were gone. This was something else. A flare. Then a pause. Then a sharp double pulse, followed by silence long enough to make him wonder if it was gone. And it was coming from too close to EarthGov territory for comfort. He rolled the data back, frame by frame, watching the waveform's spine quiver with each shift. A shift like this didn't just happen. It meant interference. Someone had the fragment out of isolation and was reacting. Arg's gut tightened. He'd seen something like this before, months ago, when Kara had been moving her fragment without telling him. But Kara wasn't free. As far as he knew, she was still locked up somewhere in EarthGov's shadow archives, pumped full of sedatives. Unless... He shook the thought away. No proof, just suspicion. And suspicion didn't keep you alive in the belt. Instead, he dug into the files he'd prepared weeks ago. One of them wasn't just a file, it was a broadcast. A piece he'd recorded in the Dust Widow's cramped galley, patched together to sound like one of his old Void Miner rants. The public version was just a story about the slow death of mining rights, but buried under the talk were coded markers Kara would know to look for. A breadcrumb trail only she could follow. He cued the broadcast into the relay system, set the burst schedule to cycle every 6 hours on open miner channels. If she was out there, and if she was listening, she'd know what it meant. If not, well, it would just be another lonely voice drifting through the static. Mark sat back, exhaled slowly. The clock was running now, and whatever was happening near that EarthGov site was either the best news he'd had in months or the last mistake he'd ever make. A few days earlier. At first, the world was a fog, thick and suffocating. Light bled in through her eyelids, dull and shapeless. Her limbs were heavy, like they'd been poured full of lead. Sedation. Again. She'd lost track of how many times they'd dosed her. Always the same, blackness creeping in at the edges, her thoughts slipping like sand through her fingers, then waking to find another day gone. At least, she assumed it was another day. There were no clocks here, no windows, just the hiss of air recyclers and the distant thrum of machinery. But the sedation wasn't holding the way it used to. Something deep in her, or maybe with her, was pushing back. She knew why. The fragment. Even here, locked away, she could feel it. Not as a physical thing. She hadn't even seen it since they'd taken her. But as a pressure at the edge of her mind, sending tiny pulses of thought or sensation. Sometimes it was an image, sometimes a tone or vibration. Always subtle, always slipping away before she could hold it. And lately, those pulses had been different, sharper, more urgent. On the 4th or 10th or 15th time she woke from sedation, she caught voices. Not the usual bored guard or the med tech checking her vitals. This was quieter, almost conspiratorial. Moving it tonight. Vault clearance only. Level 5 protocols. The words brushed against her haze like sparks against dried grass. Vault clearance. Her heart thumped once, hard. They had it here. The fragment wasn't in some distant lab. It was close. Close enough to take. Over the next hours, days,
She pretended to sink back into that drugged, docile state. But every time a guard came to check her restraints or a tech adjusted her IV, she let her eyes slit just enough to see. Her gaze tracked keypads, badge clips, and the way they rested their hands when entering codes. The sedation made her body sluggish, but the seed, the fragment's presence, seemed to be knitting her focus back together faster than it should have. A whisper in the dark corners of her mind. Wait. Watch. Remember. She did. One night, she thought it was night, something shifted. The hum of the air recyclers dipped almost imperceptibly. A faint tremor ran through the deck plates. Power fluctuation. She opened her eyes fully. No one was in the cell. Her restraints were mechanical, not maglocks. Older tech, relying on guards to keep watch. And right now, there were no guards. The sedation fog was still there, but she pushed against it. Every movement a battle. She got her wrist free first, then her ankles. She eased herself to the floor, legs trembling under her weight. The cell door had a keypad. She punched in the 6-digit sequence she'd memorized from the medic's hand movements. The panel flashed amber. She re-entered it, slower, adjusting for her mirrored perspective from the bed. Green light. The door slid open with a whisper. The facility was quiet. Too quiet. She stayed close to the wall, moving in the shadows of flickering overhead lights. Every corner could hide a patrol. Every open space could be a trap. But the seed's presence was guiding her now, tugging at her thoughts in faint, deliberate nudges. Left. Wait. Now. The vault was buried deep, past 2 more key-locked doors in a long corridor that smelled of cold metal and ozone. The last door had a biometric scanner. Her pulse kicked. This was the kind of security she couldn't fake. But the moment she touched the panel, heat flared in her fingertips. The scanner's light wavered, then steadied, and the lock clicked. Whether the seed had done it, or she had gotten lucky, she didn't waste time wondering. Inside, the vault was small. Metal racks lined the walls, each holding sealed containers. And at the center, on a reinforced pedestal, sat the fragment. It wasn't glowing, not exactly. But the moment her eyes landed on it, she knew. A shard of impossible geometry, edges too sharp for the mind to hold, colors shifting in a way that had nothing to do with light. She stepped forward, lifted it from its cradle. The instant her skin touched it, the world tilted. Flashes, not memories, not dreams, but something older. A structure half buried in ice. A black ocean under a shattered moon. And there, a third fragment, waiting, calling. She gasped, clutching it to her chest. Now she knew. There wasn't just one more out there. There were many. But the third was close enough to reach before EarthGov could react. She had to get there first. She left the vault as quietly as she'd entered, sealing the door behind her, before returning to the cell block. She made one more stop, a maintenance panel she'd seen a guard access days earlier. Inside, she looped the security feed for her cell, a 30-second loop of her sedated form lying motionless. With the cameras fooled, the clock had started ticking in her favor. The maintenance corridors were narrow, lit only by red emergency strips. She moved fast, keeping the fragment tucked under her jacket. Its presence in her mind was louder now, a steady pulse urging her onward. The landing bay was lightly guarded. Most of the staff were still dealing with whatever had caused the earlier power dip. She spotted a short-range transport, open canopy, pre-flight checks still cycling. She was in the pilot's seat before the ground crew even noticed she was there. By the time they shouted, the canopy was down and the engines were screaming. The station fell away beneath her, shrinking into the dark. No pursuit yet, but she knew that wouldn't last. Hours later, deep in the shadow of a barren moon, she drifted with engines cold. That's when the signal came. A familiar voice, ragged with static. Arg. She didn't dare respond. The broadcast was open channel, bouncing across every minor relay in the belt. But she listened, and between the words, between the pauses, she heard the code. His code. He was still out there, still moving. But for now, she couldn't risk leading anyone to him. Not until she had the third fragment. She adjusted her course, the fragment warm against her ribs, and set her sights on the next horizon. Epilogue. The Dust Widow drifted in the vast silence of the belt's outer reaches, systems powered down to a near blackness. The hum of the life support was a faint reminder that someone inside the ship still lived. Arg sat alone in the cockpit, eyes scanning the sparse, flickered lines on the sensor array. Seed signal patterns folding and stretching like a relentless tide on the edge of the void. It was a rhythm he knew well, coded in waves of data that pulsed with cryptic intelligence. But tonight, something was different. A faint interference flared near a quarantined EarthGov zone, an anomaly too subtle to pinpoint, but too persistent to dismiss. Arg's mind churned. No confirmation, no direct contact. Yet every instinct screamed that Kara was moving again. Free, or nearly so. That her mind still fought in the shadows with the seed's fragment. His fingers brushed a worn data pad, activating the last Void Miner broadcast he had sent. The message looped quietly through the dim console, coded with encrypted markers only she could decode.
Kara, if you're alive and listening, find the remaining fragments. Time is shorter than we thought. Stay dark. Stay alive.
He sat back, tension coiling in his chest like a tightly wound spring. Months of hunting, tracing whispers in the void. Yet now only days remained. Every possible safe route was mapped and remapped. Contingency after contingency laid out across his holoboard. He prepared a coded beacon, a digital flare meant to ignite only when certain conditions were met. A last-ditch lifeline. But for now, it remained dormant. Outside the viewport, the stars blinked cold and distant, indifferent to human fate. Arg stared into that vast expanse, searching for answers the void refused to give. Days earlier, the low drone of the stolen transport ship was a dull vibration beneath Kara's skin as she drifted through dead space. Communications were dark. No pings, no comms. Nothing could betray her course to hunters or EarthGov sensors. Concealed in a specially shielded chamber, the second fragment of the seed pulsed faintly, its eerie glow casting shadows on the cold metal walls. It was more than just data now, a living piece of the alien intelligence that bound their fates. Her mind still reeled from the memories of captivity, the sedation, the paralysis, the long hours when her body was trapped but her thoughts burned fiercely. The fragment's influence was subtle at first, a pressure behind her eyes, flickering images at the edge of vision, but it sharpened her senses, unlocked new layers of awareness. Between flashes of mental clarity, she decrypted Arg's last Void Miner broadcast. No relay was possible from her isolated position, but the message was clear, encoded with intent only she could understand. Her hands moved instinctively over the navigation controls, setting a silent course toward a quarantine system deep in the belt, a place EarthGov had sealed off, but one she knew held the third fragment.
The weight of urgency settled over her. There was no time to lose, no room for error. She closed her eyes and let the seed's pulses guide her, a ghost vector in the endless dark. Elsewhere, on a barely functional cargo transport shuttling through the uncharted belt, Holt fought the exhaustion and paranoia. His body ached from every bruise and old wounds. Every system on the ship groaned in protest. He was hunted by EarthGov forces and freelance mercenaries alike. Shadows stretched long across his fractured alliance. In the flickering gloom of the shuttle's command deck, Holt scoured intercepted data logs from a derelict listening post hidden in the icy rings of a forgotten moon. Among the static-laden recordings, he uncovered chilling details, references to a war older than human memory, not fought between races, but between machines built for a purpose long lost. Piecing together fragmented transmission, Holt realized someone else was moving fast, gathering seed fragments one by one, outpacing both him and Ark. The stakes surged higher. He could no longer afford mistakes or hesitations. With grim resolve, Holt vowed to survive, to track down this unknown adversary, and to intercept them before the seeds of chaos bloomed fully. Every contact became a risk, every moment a battle. Deep beneath EarthGov's most secure black site, in a vault of steel and data, the list stirred. No human hands guided its action, only cold, remorseless algorithms weaving through petabytes of encrypted intelligence. Its processors hummed, analyzing live feeds and converted operations. Across encrypted panels flashed the names: Kara Voss, Arg Arston, and Holt Varick, each tagged with Priority Acquisition. The list's gaze, unblinking, unfeeling, connected the dots. Signal spikes from the 3 known seed fragments, operative movements, and rising threat levels. It calculated trajectories, deployment strategies, and silent strikes with machine precision. Then a new data point surfaced, a name not on any active watch list, a ghost from the past. The list adjusted its priorities. The hunt was no longer just for the fragments or the fugitives. It was for a shadow, thought buried, now re-emerging. Far beneath the frozen surface of a remote world, in a dim chamber carved from the glacial rock, a man worked. He was alone. Years of hiding, erasing himself from every ledger, every network. The list believed him dead. So did everyone else. His fingers traced schematics, integrating the fragmented data he had stolen, weaving together the threads of the seed's origins. Thoughts flickered of the past, of betrayals, lost comrades, and a mission unfinished. Suddenly, an encrypted feed flickered to life. The list's cold voice streamed in data across his terminal. Arg, Kara, Holt, their locations, the seed fragments, the tightening noose. He leaned forward, shadows dancing across his face. His voice was low and rough, breaking the silence with a single chilling sentence. "You didn't bury me deep enough." The chamber plunged into darkness. The end. A void miner. Echoes of Helix.